to get revenge on the man who broke her daughter, she didn't use threats. She used the truth. This is how a quiet librarian orchestrated a public takedown of a corrupt mogul. You'll want to subscribe, darling, for more stories like this.
My name is Sharon, and I've always considered myself a quiet woman. For 35 years, I worked as a librarian, my world built on the gentle rustle of pages and the hushed respect of a silent room. My life was small, ordered, and my greatest joy, my entire universe, was my daughter Maya. I raised her on my own, pouring every ounce of my love and meager salary into making sure she had the chances I never did. And I thought I'd succeeded. She was bright, ambitious, with a heart so full of trust it was like a beautiful, unguarded garden. I never imagined a man like Julian Croft would come along, a man who saw that garden not as something to cherish, but as a place to plunder and poison. He was a millionaire, a real estate mogul, the kind of man you see in slick magazines, his smile as polished as his Italian leather shoes. And he ruined my daughter. He ruined our lives. And he thought he could just walk away, leaving us to sweep up the broken pieces of the fairy tale he'd sold her. He thought I was just a quiet little librarian. He had no idea I was a mother. And if you knew the secret I would later uncover about his pristine business empire, the one rotten beam holding up his entire glittering facade, you'd know that his comfortable life was about to get very, very loud. Maya met him at a charity fundraiser she was helping to organize. She was 28, working for a nonprofit, full of ideals and a belief in the good of people. Julian was the event's biggest sponsor. He swept her off her feet with the casual force of a hurricane. He was charming, attentive, worldly. He listened to her dreams of building community centers, praised her passion, made her feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. He sent her flowers, took her to restaurants I'd only ever seen in movies, flew her to New York for a weekend on his private jet. I was wary from the start. Men like that, with that much power and that much polish, they don't just happen upon sweet, idealistic girls from humble backgrounds by accident. There's always a game. "Be careful, baby girl," I'd warned her gently. "He seems too good to be true." "Oh, Mama, don't be so cynical," she'd laughed, her eyes shining with infatuation. "He's wonderful. He believes in my work. He wants to help me. He's not like the other guys I've dated. He's a real grown-up." For a year, I watched her fall deeper under his spell. He became her world. He convinced her to quit her job at the nonprofit to work for him directly, to head up his new philanthropic division. A division, I noted, that seemed to consist entirely of her. He encouraged her to invest her own significant savings, a nest egg I had painstakingly helped her build, into one of his can't-miss real estate ventures. "It's how we'll fund our first community center, Maya," he told her, "our project." She believed him. She trusted him completely. And I, wanting to believe in my daughter's happiness, bit my tongue and prayed I was wrong about him. The ruin came, as it always does, swiftly and without mercy. The can't-miss real estate venture suddenly, inexplicably, went bankrupt. It was a complex deal involving offshore partners and leveraged funds, all things far beyond Maya's comprehension. All she knew was that the project had collapsed, and because her name was on all the paperwork as a managing partner, a title Julian had so generously given her, she was now legally entangled in the mess. Her entire life savings were wiped out. Worse, she was now associated with a failed, slightly shady enterprise, her professional reputation in tatters. When she, heartbroken and confused, turned to Julian for help, the charming millionaire suddenly became a cold, distant stranger. "It's business, Maya," he told her coolly over the phone, refusing to see her in person. "Sometimes investments don't work out. It's a risk we both took." "We took?" she'd cried. "But Julian, it was all my money, and you said it was guaranteed." "I think you misunderstood," he'd said, his voice like ice. "I'm sorry it didn't work out for you. I have to go now. I have a meeting." And just like that, he was gone. He cut off all contact, ghosted her, left her heartbroken, broke, and professionally ruined. He had used her passion, her trust, her money to fuel some complex financial scheme of his own, and when it had served its purpose, he discarded her like a piece of trash. Seeing my daughter in the aftermath was the most painful thing I have ever witnessed. The light had gone out of her eyes. She was consumed by shame, by heartbreak, by the feeling of being a complete and utter fool. She wouldn't eat, she barely left her room. She was a ghost, haunted by the man who had promised her a fairy tale and delivered a nightmare. That was when my grief for her transformed. It cooled from a hot, helpless sorrow into a cold, diamond-hard rage. I had lived a quiet life. I had never made waves. I had always believed in politeness, in turning the other cheek. But this was different. This man hadn't just broken my daughter's heart, he had tried to break her spirit. He had tried to ruin her life. And he had underestimated me. He had underestimated what a quiet, retired librarian with a broken heart and a righteous fury was capable of. He had no idea what her mother could do, and I was about to give him his first lesson.
Julian has destroyed Maya's life and thinks he got away with it. But he doesn't know that her mother, the quiet librarian Sharon, has just declared war on him. What secrets will she unearth, and what will be her first move in this battle for justice?
They say a librarian's superpower is silence, the ability to move through stacks of knowledge to find the one crucial fact buried in a mountain of noise, all without making a sound. For 35 years, that was my life, quiet, methodical, overlooked. Julian Croft, in his arrogant dismissal of me as a quiet little librarian, had no idea he was facing a woman whose entire professional life had been training for this very moment, the meticulous, patient, and silent dismantling of a fraudulent narrative. My war wouldn't be fought with shouting or tears. It would be fought with facts, with carefully unearthed truths that, when assembled, would be as devastating as any bomb. My first front was my own home, specifically my daughter. Maya was a ghost in her own life, drifting through the rooms, the vibrant light in her eyes replaced by a dull, persistent ache. She rarely spoke of Julian, but his name was a constant, unspoken presence between us. Her shame and heartbreak were the fuel that fed my cold, burning rage. Every time I looked at her, so broken and lost, my resolve hardened. I was no longer just her mother. I was her archivist, her researcher, her avenger. My second front was my laptop. The skills I'd honed tracking down obscure historical texts and verifying dubious citations, I now applied to Julian Croft. I didn't just Google his name. I cross-referenced corporate filings, delved into archived local news from cities where he'd previously operated, and scoured public records. I built a timeline, a web of his business dealings, his philanthropic donations, his carefully curated public appearances. He was a master of image control, always associated with glittering, high-profile projects that made him look like a civic-minded benefactor. The pattern was there, subtle but undeniable. He'd partner with a smaller, idealistic entity, a nonprofit like Maya's, a local historical society, an environmental group, on a community-focused project. The project would generate enormous positive press for him, but would then inevitably collapse due to unforeseen market forces or partner insolvency, leaving the smaller entity in ruins while Croft himself somehow emerged financially unscathed, his reputation polished by the initial noble endeavor. Maya's failed community center project wasn't a one-off, it was a business model. He wasn't building communities, he was harvesting them, reaping their goodwill and credibility before leaving the husks behind. But this knowledge alone wasn't enough. It was his word against my daughter's, a broke, heartbroken young woman. I needed a lever, something current, something he couldn't easily dismiss as the past. And then I found it. It was buried in a dry, lengthy transcript of a city council planning meeting. Croft Development was the frontrunner for the city's most prestigious project in a decade, the construction of the new state-of-the-art public library and cultural center. My world. The irony was so bitter it almost choked me. He wanted to put his name on a new library, the very symbol of truth and knowledge, using a fortune built on lies and destruction. The project was his crown jewel, the thing that would cement his legacy as a great city father, not just a ruthless businessman. The final decision was weeks away, and public opinion was crucial. He had spent a fortune on PR, on charity donations, on projecting an image of unimpeachable integrity. His reputation was everything. And that, I realized with a jolt of pure cold clarity, was his Achilles heel. His entire public persona was the target. I now knew what to attack, but I still needed to figure out how. How could I, a retired librarian, challenge a man like Julian Croft on such a public stage? A direct accusation would be dismissed as the ravings of a bitter elderly woman whose daughter had a soured business deal with him. I needed something irrefutable, something that would make the city council, the media, his wealthy backers sit up and take notice. My research continued, deeper now, more focused. I wasn't just looking at his business dealings, I was looking for the cracks in his personal facade. For someone so public, his early life was a near total blank. It was as if he had sprung into existence as a wealthy real estate mogul 10 years ago.
A transfer of ownership for a small, failing farm. The seller was a distraught-looking family. The buyer was a shell corporation I recognized from my research on Croft. But it was the witness signature on that old deed that made me stop breathing. The signature was messy, almost illegible, but I knew it. I'd seen it on my son-in-law's wedding certificate, on the checks he'd written to my daughter. It was the signature of Julian Croft's father, and his name, listed on that old document, was not Croft. It was Kroshenko. And the reason I knew that name was because that farm had belonged to my own grandparents, a property my family had been forced to sell for a pittance during a time of great hardship, sold to a sympathetic investor who had promised to help them, only to flip the land for a massive profit a year later. My hands trembled. The room felt cold, the past rushing in. Julian Croft hadn't just stumbled into my daughter's life by chance. Our families were connected by an old, forgotten wound, a story of exploitation that went back a generation. He hadn't just ruined my daughter. His family had already ruined mine, and he had built his empire on the ashes of our family's loss. My surprise for Mr. Croft, I realized with a chilling, absolute certainty, had just become a whole lot more personal and a whole lot more explosive. For a long time, I just sat there in the quiet of my late husband's study, the digital image of that old property deed glowing on my tablet screen. Kroshenko, the name echoed in my memory, a ghost from stories my grandmother used to tell, stories of hardship, of losing the family farm, of a slick city man who had come with promises and left with their future. I had always thought of it as just a sad family anecdote. I never imagined that the architect of my grandparents' ruin was the father of the very man who had just destroyed my daughter. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern, a predatory legacy passed down from father to son. The world suddenly felt very small and very, very cold. My rage, which had been a clear, focused thing, now became something deeper, something colder. This wasn't just about getting justice for Maya anymore. This was about settling a score that was a generation old. This was about reclaiming a piece of my family's stolen history. I showed the deed to Maya the next morning. I told her the old family stories, the ones she'd only half listened to as a child. As she stared at the screen, at the name Kroshenko next to her great-grandparents' farm, I saw the last vestiges of her heartbroken shame transform into a steely resolve that matched my own. "So, it wasn't random," she whispered, her voice full of a new, chilling understanding. "He targeted me. He knew who I was." "I don't know if he knew from the start, baby girl," I said, my voice grim. "But it doesn't matter. It's in his blood. His family built their fortune on the ruins of ours, and he tried to do it again. We were no longer just victims. We were the inheritors of a long-standing feud, and we were going to finish it." Our plans shifted. Exposing his business practices was one thing. Exposing his very identity, the fraudulent foundation upon which his entire Croft persona was built, was another thing entirely. Julian Croft, the civic-minded philanthropist who wanted to build a library for the city, was a fiction. The real man was the son of an immigrant hustler who had changed his name to escape his past and claw his way into polite society. And I had the proofs. My new target wasn't just his reputation, it was his identity. My new battleground wasn't just the city council, but the court of public opinion. And my weapon wasn't just an anonymous email, it was a story. Our story. I spent the next 2 weeks crafting it with Maya's help. We didn't hire a lawyer yet, not for this part. This had to be personal. I wrote a long, detailed letter. I told the story of my family, of the farm lost. I attached a copy of the old deed with the Kroshenko name clearly visible. Then I told the story of my daughter, of her romance with the charming Julian Croft, of his philanthropic project that bankrupted her, of the eerie parallels between his actions and his father's. I didn't make direct accusations of a conspiracy. I didn't have to. I just laid out the facts, the devastating pattern, the two stories separated by a generation but identical in their predatory nature. I framed it as a letter to the editor, a cautionary tale from a lifelong resident of the city. The question was, where to send it? The main city newspaper might be too cautious, too afraid of Croft's lawyers. I needed someone who was hungry, who wasn't afraid to take on the powerful. Maya found her, a young, tenacious, investigative blogger named Sarah Jenkins, who ran a popular local website called The Charleston Watchdog. She had a reputation for digging into local politics and corporate overreach. We sent her the letter anonymously at first, from a new, untraceable email address. We simply titled it, The Two Families of Julian Croft. We didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Sarah Jenkins replied, "This is an incredible story, but I'll need proof, and ideally, someone willing to go on the record." This was the moment of truth. To hide behind anonymity was safe. To step into the light was to invite the full fury of Silas, no, Julian Croft, and whatever power he could bring to bear against me. I looked at Maya. She looked at me, her eyes clear and unafraid. "We'd do it, Mama," she said, "together." So I agreed to meet with Sarah Jenkins. We met in a quiet corner of the library, my old sanctuary. I showed her everything, the deed, the financial records of Maya's failed project. I told my story, my voice quiet but unwavering. Sarah Jenkins listened, her eyes widening as she realized the scope of the story I was handing her. This wasn't just a jilted lover's tale. It was a potential bombshell that could rock the city's business and political establishment. She published the story 3 days later. The headline was explosive. "The Philanthropist's Secret. Did a real estate mogul's empire begin with a decades-old lie?" The article was a masterpiece. It laid out our family's story, side by side with the story of Julian Croft's rise. It didn't make any unproven accusations, but it asked devastating questions. It published a redacted copy of the old deed. It cast a massive shadow of doubt over Julian Croft, the city's would-be benefactor, right as he was seeking public approval for his legacy project, the library. The surprise was no longer being prepared in quiet. The bomb had been detonated, and the city was about to be rocked by its shockwave. And Julian Croft, for the first time in his life, was about to find out what it felt like to have his own past, his own secrets, used as a weapon against him.
The story has exploded. Now that the secrets of Julian Croft and his family are public, how will he react? Will a fierce public battle begin, or will he try to silence Sharon? The fight for reputation and justice is entering its most dangerous phase.
The morning after Sarah Jenkins' article went live, my small, quiet house felt like the eye of a hurricane. The silence was deceptive, pregnant with the fury of the storm raging just beyond my doorstep. My phone began to ring before I'd even had my first sip of coffee, and it didn't stop. First, it was friends from my old library circle, their voices a mixture of shock and concerned support. Then came the reporters, from the Macon Telegraph, from a TV station in Atlanta, all hungry for a quote, for more details on the bombshell that had just dropped on one of the state's most prominent businessmen. I followed the plan Miss Jenkins and I had agreed upon. I didn't speak to any of them directly. My answer was always the same, delivered in a calm, steady voice I hardly recognized as my own. I have no comment at this time. The story published on the Charleston Watchdog speaks for itself. It was maddeningly polite and utterly infuriating for them, I'm sure. It made me sound credible, not like a woman seeking sensationalist attention. The fallout online was immediate and spectacular. The comment section on the article exploded. People were digging up old news, connecting dots, sharing their own stories of dealing with Croft Development's aggressive tactics. Maya, my brilliant daughter, monitored it all, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. "Mama, look at this," she said, her eyes wide. "Someone from Savannah just posted about their family's bakery being forced out by a mysterious legal challenge right before Croft bought the whole block. They're corroborating our story." My quiet act of personal justice was snowballing into a public reckoning. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Julian Croft, as expected, did not remain silent. His counterattack was swift and vicious. A high-powered PR firm issued a statement on his behalf, calling my story a fantastical and malicious fabrication concocted by a disgruntled and confused elderly woman being manipulated by irresponsible online muckrakers. They claimed my family had a long-standing grudge and was attempting to extort Mr. Croft now that his library project was poised to bring so much good to the city. They even hinted at my fragile mental state following my husband's death, twisting my grief into a weapon against me. Then came the official legal threat, a cease and desist letter from a team of lawyers that probably cost more per hour than I used to make in a month. It was delivered by a courier, a thick, intimidating packet of paper threatening a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for defamation if I didn't immediately issue a public retraction and apology. I read the letter, my hand steady. The old Sharon would have been petrified. The new Sharon? I just slid it across the table to Maya. "File this under desperate measures," I said. The real battle, I knew, would be for public opinion and the hearts and minds of the city council members who held the fate of Croft's library project in their hands. They called an emergency public hearing to address the serious allegations that had been raised. This was it. This was the stage I had inadvertently built. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur. Maya and I worked closely with Sarah Jenkins, the blogger, who had been contacted by 2 more families with stories similar to mine, all connected to shell companies that led back to Croft. They were scared, but my willingness to come forward had given them courage. They agreed to submit anonymous affidavits. We were no longer alone. The night before the hearing, Julian Croft made his most desperate move. There was a knock at my door late in the evening. It was him. He looked terrible. His polished veneer was gone, replaced by a gray, haggard desperation. His eyes were wild. "What do you want, Julian?" I asked, speaking through the locked screen door. "You have to stop this, Sharon," he hissed, his voice a low, desperate rasp. "You're ruining me, everything I've built." "Everything your father built on the back of my family, you mean? And everything you've built on the back of my daughter and countless others like her? No, Julian, I don't think I will stop." "I'll give you anything," he pleaded, his composure cracking. "Money, a settlement, just call off the dogs, retract the story, tell them you were confused." I just looked at him, at this man who had so casually destroyed my daughter's spirit, now begging on my doorstep. I felt nothing but cold, empty pity. "The time for deals is over, Julian," I said softly. "You wanted to be a great man, a pillar of the community. Well, tomorrow, the community is going to have its say. You should have thought about the price of your legacy before you built it on other people's pain." I closed the inner door, leaving him standing there in the darkness. The city council hearing was packed, a standing room only affair, filled with reporters, concerned citizens, and Croft's stony-faced lawyers. I sat in the front row with Maya. When my name was called, I walked to the podium, my heart pounding, but my steps were steady. I didn't speak with anger or vitriol. I simply told my story. I told them about the farm my grandparents lost. I told them about my daughter's dream of building a community center and how Julian Croft had used that dream to ruin her. I spoke of the patterns, the other families, the web of deceit that his philanthropy was built on. "This isn't about personal revenge," I concluded, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. "It's about the character of our city. Do we want our legacy, our new public library, to be built by a man whose own foundation is rotten with lies and the exploitation of the vulnerable? I don't believe we do." When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then a slow, steady applause began to build, starting with a few people in the back and spreading through the room.
The council's decision was announced an hour later. The library contract with Croft Development was suspended, pending a full, independent investigation into all the allegations. It was a stunning blow to Julian. His legacy project, his claim to civic glory, was dead in the water. We had won. We had faced the dragon, and if we hadn't slain it entirely, we had wounded it, exposed it for the monster it was. The battle wasn't over, but the war for the truth had been won.
Sharon has won a major public victory, and Julian Croft's empire is shaken. But what will his countermove be? And can he still harm Sharon and Maya now that he's cornered? The final chapter will reveal the ultimate price of this victory and the peace Sharon will find.
The City Council's decision to suspend Croft's library contract was the first domino to fall. But in the quiet that followed, a new kind of tension took hold. A man like Julian Croft, a man whose entire life was built on power and control, doesn't simply accept defeat. I waited for his retaliation, for some new, insidious attack, but the days turned into a week, and the silence from his camp was deafening. It was Miss Rossi who explained it to me. "He's trapped, Sharon," she'd said over the phone. "The public exposure has put him under a microscope. Any move against you now would look like blatant witness intimidation and only confirm his guilt. You've cornered him with the truth." And the truth, it turned out, was a powerful force. Sarah Jenkins' blog post had gone viral in our state, and other news outlets had picked up the scent. Spurred on by our story, 2 more families, victims of Croft Development's predatory tactics in other cities, came forward with their own lawyers. The trickle of whispers I had started had become a flood. The Attorney General's office launched a full-scale investigation into Julian Croft and his father's business empire, a legacy of generational fraud. I watched it all unfold from the quiet comfort of my living room, a strange, almost surreal experience. I wasn't an active general in this war anymore. I was the catalyst who had started the landslide. My part was done. The downfall was as swift as it was total. Facing indictments for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering, Julian Croft's empire imploded. His partners deserted him, his accounts were frozen, and the name that had once been synonymous with power and philanthropy was now synonymous with scandal. He and his father's past had finally caught up with them. The last I heard, Julian was facing a long, protracted legal battle that would consume what was left of his fortune and his freedom. My return gift had been delivered in full. He had tried to ruin my daughter and steal my family's past, and in doing so, he had lost his own future. With the threat of Julian gone, a real, lasting peace began to settle over our lives. But the most important healing was happening right here in my own home. Maya, my brilliant, resilient daughter, slowly began to find her way back to the light. The shame that had bent her shoulders began to lift. The heartbreak was still there, a scar she would always carry, but it no longer defined her. She started volunteering with Sarah Jenkins, the blogger, using her own painful experience to help research other stories of corporate and financial abuse. She had a unique empathy for the victims, a first-hand understanding of the shame and confusion they felt. "He took my dream of building a community center from me, Mama," she told me one evening, her eyes clear and determined for the first time in a long time. "So I'm going to build something else, a community of survivors, a place where people can find the information and the courage to fight back, just like you did." And just like that, she had transformed her pain into purpose. She was no longer Julian Croft's victim. She was a warrior in her own right. My life, once defined by the quiet order of library shelves, had found a new, unexpected rhythm. The anger that had fueled me was gone, replaced with the deep, quiet contentment. My relationship with Maya, forged in the fire of this crisis, was stronger, more honest than it had ever been. We were no longer just mother and daughter. We were partners, survivors. I never sought another romance, another grand adventure. The love I had for my late husband, the quiet life we had built, was enough. My second act wasn't about finding a new love or traveling the world. It was about defending what I already had, about rediscovering the strength that had been inside me all along. It was about proving, to myself and to the world, that a quiet life does not mean a weak one, and that a librarian's greatest skill is knowing where to find the truth and having the courage to share it. One sunny afternoon, Maya and I were in the garden, planting new tomato seedlings, our hands deep in the rich, dark earth. She was telling me about a new case she and Sarah were investigating, her voice full of passion and purpose. I looked at her, at my beautiful, strong daughter, her spirit no longer broken but soaring. I thought of Julian Croft, a man who had everything and valued nothing, and I felt a flicker of something close to pity. He underestimated the power of a mother's love. He thought he could ruin our lives, but all he had managed to do in the end was show us how strong we truly were. He had meant to leave us with nothing. Instead, he had given us everything that mattered, a renewed purpose, an unbreakable bond, and the quiet, unshakable peace of knowing we had faced down a monster together and won.
And that, I thought, digging my hands into the warm soil, was a legacy far more valuable than any fortune.